Okay, so during the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be talking about a very broad subject and try to condense it into less than 30 slides or less than 20 slides, which is immigrating to Canada. And mainly I'll be trying to focus on the paths for professionals and for business people. Canada has, just so you know a little bit about me, my name is Andrew Carvajal. I am a partner and a lawyer in an immigration boutique in Toronto that's called Deloche Law Group, where we do all types of Canadian immigration for people who want to go to any place in the country. But we're a group of lawyers and also some immigration consultants, and we specialize on different areas. So I personally specialize on what's called corporate immigration, so all types of work permits, and permanent residence for people who are professionals or who are entrepreneurs and they're coming through provincial or federal programs. I also do study permits, so for those who want to come to Canada to study and then the transition to permanent residence and work. And I also do visitor visas as well, especially for business visitors that are coming to Canada. And I have a partner and I have other lawyers at the firm who work on different areas. So they work more on the refugee side, on the litigation side when they have to go to court, when they have to go to tribunals as well, and do cases that have to do with humanitarian or compassionate submission. So Canada has more than 80 programs to immigrate, which is why it is so important to some extent for a client to be guided in relation to these programs. And what might be the best immigration path for someone is not necessarily going to be the same path for someone else. It is very difficult in 30 minutes to summarize Canadian immigration. It is also very difficult in 5 minutes from getting to know a person and just hearing a little bit about their story, trying to decide what's the best path for them to Canada. This is why we normally have to sit with someone, take a look at their profile, take a look at their family unit, their education, their work experience to be able to come up with the best strategy. And that's a little bit of what I want to convey this morning, that there's a lot of different options, even though I'm only focusing in a particular part of immigration, which is economic immigration. And maybe the best option for you might not be the best option for someone else. But there's still, and some people might have no options too. Sometimes you have to be realistic and say that there's really not a possibility for someone to immigrate to Canada. But the great thing about our country is that there's still many opportunities for people to come to the country, and not only as temporary residents, as I provided in this slide, visitors, students, or workers who have, in most cases, a job offer, or they're setting up a company in Canada, but also as permanent residents. I mean, we still have a lot of programs for people who are highly skilled, but also people who might be semi-skilled, and some people who are have technical backgrounds and jobs to come to Canada to become permanent residents, sometimes with a job offer, sometimes without a job offer. And that is great because not all countries have this. And we have programs that work very well, that are relatively fast in terms of processing compared to some other countries like the US. And that's why, I mean, immigration to Canada is very popular. But unfortunately, it's become so popular that it's become very competitive and challenging to some extent. So I think it's always good to be surrounded by someone who's an expert who can help you navigate the different programs, and also explain what are the different programs and find the best path for someone. And just so you see, so we're going to be focusing on permanent residence. We'll talk a little bit about temporary residence, but we're mainly going to be focusing on permanent residence. And I'll be focusing on what's called economic class. So I'm going to be talking about provincial and federal programs for skilled workers and for entrepreneurs. But there's obviously other options to immigrate to Canada as a member as being sponsored by a family member. And so, oh, sorry, someone is just providing some tips on how to make the slides bigger. So there's options to bring family members, spouses, children, parents to Canada. There's humanitarian routes, of course, such as refugee claims, applications that are compassionate and humanitarian. But I'll be focusing on what I do best, or what I actually do, which is the economic class. So professionals, skilled workers, And actually, the word professionals is kind of a misnomer because there's people who are not necessarily professional occupations, but technical occupations and can navigate these programs as well. And then I'll be talking about entrepreneurs. So again, just trying to give you an overview so you have an idea of what's out there, okay? Let's start by the federal level, because this is where most people, or my clients, most of my clients end up navigating a federal program to immigrate to Canada as a permanent resident. There's three main programs. There's others. I mean, there's some programs for caregivers. There's other programs that we'll talk about later on for people who are self-employed or are setting up a business. But the main three programs for skilled workers are the Federal Skilled Worker Program, Federal Skilled Trades, and Canadian Experience Class. Now, the Canadian Experience Class requires that people have 1 year of Canadian work experience as an employee in the last 3 years. So it's not accessible to everyone, especially those who are outside of Canada, but it's the one that we navigate the most with people who have studied in Canada and have worked in Canada, or have come to Canada with work permits and are now transitioning to permanent residence. We have a very interesting program as well, which is for the people in the skilled trades. So carpenters, electricians, butchers, cooks, and basically it's a little bit more flexible than other programs in terms of like the education levels, the English level, or French level, but they do require either a job offer that needs to meet certain criteria or to have a certificate of qualification in the province to be able to navigate that program. And then the one that I would say 98% of the clients who are, or maybe 90% of the clients who are outside of Canada, who are immigrating just without any connection to Canada, they navigate the Federal Skilled Worker Program, which is for people who have skilled work experience anywhere in the world. Minimum is 1 year continuous. And skilled work experience could be, again, as an electrician, as a cook, as a doctor, and an engineer, and it counts exactly the same way. They need to have a certain level of English or French, and it's a point-based system. So be able to qualify for this, a point-based program. So to be able to qualify for this program, you need to have 67 out of 100 points. It doesn't matter if you have 90, 95, 70, you need to get to 67. And this is going to be based on a combination of your age, your education, your work experience, the years of work experience, language skills, and you get extra points if you have some family in Canada, if your spouse has an English or French level, if you studied or worked in Canada. But basically, that's how you get to the 67 out of 100. Now, something very important to understand, and a lot of people might have heard of this thing or this system called Express Entry, is that since 2015, to access those three programs that I just talked about, you need to go through a platform that's called Express Entry. Express Entry is not an immigration program, and I think that's something that's very important to understand. The programs are still the same. The three federal programs that I talked about, there's also some provincial programs, so for people who are immigrating to a province, that are administered through Express Entry. But it's instead of being a program, it's kind of like the filter to Canada's federal programs for skilled workers. If I want to submit an application as a skilled worker, I need to go through Express Entry. I can't do it in another way. Prior to 2015, as long as I met the requirements for the program, for instance, the federal skilled worker, and I had the 67 points, and I was in a list of occupations that they were admitting applications from, I could submit my application. That was fine. Since 2015, that list of occupations doesn't exist. So it doesn't matter if you're a carpenter or a doctor, you can submit an application, but you need to be invited. And what determines whether you're invited or not is Express Entry, which is a point-based system. Basically, Canada moved towards a model where it determined we want to invite the brightest. We want to invite the people who are most qualified to become good permanent residents or to settle in our labor market. And that is what Express Entry is about. A candidate will create an online profile, which information about themselves, their family composition. They need to write an English or French test, even if it's their first language. They need to provide details of their education, and if it's a foreign education that they want to get points for, it needs to be accredited by certain institutions. And then you need to provide details of your work experience in the last 10 years, and if you have a spouse, their language skills, education, and work experience as well. Then you go into a pool if you meet one of the requirements of the federal programs, and you're giving a score. And this score is going to be based on age, education, work experience, language skills. If you have a spouse, you're going to get extra points for the education and language skills of the spouse. You have a sibling in Canada, you're going to get extra points. If you have Canadian education or work experience, you're going to get extra points. And we'll take a look at the breakdown in the next few slides. And you're giving a score. So basically, my score could be, let's say, for instance, 480 points. Then the government, every 2 weeks on average, holds draws. So basically, they invite 3,500 candidates, the top 3,500 candidates with the best score. That might be 475 and above. Then 2 weeks later, the top 3,900 candidates with the best score, which at that point might be 471 and above. So it keeps going up and down. Sometimes they do draws that are specific to a program. Especially during COVID, they've been doing that a lot because of the travel restrictions in Canada. But normally, it's just general draws. And if you have a competitive score, you'll get an invitation. So you get something called an invitation to apply. And that's when you prepare the full application. That's when we actually start preparing our clients' job letters, all the evidence of their work experience, their education, medical exam, police clearance, all those things. And we normally have, it's normally 60 days to submit, but because of COVID, they're giving people more time. So 90 days, we send the application off. And what's really incredible, and again, this was prior to COVID, is that for 80% of the cases, we would see a result or an answer in 6 months or less. So it's really an express way to bring someone to Canada. And it's a system that's been working quite well. And I mean, many people have been able to immigrate through this. It's very competitive, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it definitely is a route for the right candidate. I sometimes do a consultation with someone who might have a job offer, or they might want to come to Canada to do a master's. And I make the assessment and I say, you know what, you're already competitive to apply for permanent residence. Why don't you go straight for this, even in addition to your study permit or whatever you want to do, because you'll be a permanent resident and you'll be able to do whatever you want. You'll be paying less tuition if you're studying. And it's a great way to come to Canada. But it is competitive, and it's become more and more competitive. And I'll tell you why. So basically, the score that you get through Express Entry is up to 1,200, but most of the points are going to be based on your own skills and experience, and some spouse or common law factors. Now, it's worth highlighting that doesn't mean that because you have a spouse, you're going to be more competitive and you're going to get extra points. The way that it works is that if you're single, if you don't have a spouse, all the points are allocated to yourself. So you get more points for your age, you get more points for your education and your work experience and your language skills than if you have a spouse. If you have a spouse, they take a few points from you, but they gave you extra points because of your spouse. So the idea is that whether you're single or with a spouse, it adds up to 600, okay? And then you can get additional points for things such as having done Canadian education, having a very strong French language skills, having sibling who's a Canadian permanent resident or citizen who lives in Canada. If you have arranged employment, which is a job offer, but that needs to meet certain parameters. Otherwise, it has to have what's called a labor market impact assessment, or it needs to be from an employer that you've worked for in Canada for a year. So it's not any type of job offer, but it needs to meet certain parameters. You can get 50 to 200 points, depending if it's a senior managerial position or just a regular position. And then for something that's called a provincial nomination, which we'll talk about later, you can get 600 points. That's going to guarantee you an invitation. So there's that path, and it's a path for many people, but it is very competitive. I mean, I would say 3 years ago, we were able to get a lot of our clients through this path, but it's become so competitive, especially since less people are immigrating to the US because of what's happening, since more and more people are choosing Canada because of, I mean, how many immigrants it attracts. Today, for a client to be competitive under Express Entry without having studied in Canada, without having worked in Canada, and let's say that they only have English level, no French level, they would need to be, on average, 32 years or less, have 2 degrees, so a bachelor's plus something else, excellent level of English, and 3 years or more of foreign work experience. So it's possible, but it's a high threshold. Now, I might have a client who's 33 or 34, but has a master's or a PhD. Well, that might compensate. Or I might have a client who doesn't meet all the things that I said, but they have a very strong French language skills, so that gives them extra points. So a little bit of variation, but I mean, it really has to be someone very young, excellent level of English or French, 3 years or more of work experience, and normally 2 degrees to be competitive. Okay, that's at the federal level for skilled workers. There's also provincial programs. So the provinces have devised their own programs to attract people to immigrate directly to the province. So Nova Scotia will have their own programs to have people come to Canada. They're obviously going to be, to some extent, easier to navigate than the federal programs. And the whole purpose of these programs is to have people immigrate locally to a particular province or territory and give them that opportunity that they might not have at the federal level. So sometimes, so they're great programs, and we navigate with a lot of clients that might not be competitive at the federal level, as long as they meet the requirements. They generally require, and it makes sense, so most provincial programs would require that you have a connection to a province. So either that you've studied in the province, that you've worked in the province already, or that you have a job offer. So rarely, but sometimes we can, but rarely, we can navigate a provincial program without any connection to the province. Now, there are some programs that do not require a job offer. There's an excellent one for Ontario, for instance, for Francophone people who have a good level of French and a medium level of English, where the score that they have in Express Entry is not even a factor. So there's some opportunities, but most of them will require some kind of tie to the province or the having studied, worked, or having a job offer. But they're a great alternative when Express Entry is not an option, okay? So before we move into the business people, we've talked about the federal, so we were talking about skilled workers. So people who are not business owners, who are not business people, who have worked as employees for a company, which is probably, I would say, a large majority of my clients. We can try the federal programs, we can give it a go, but you need to have the right candidate, especially if they're coming from out of Canada, very young, very highly educated, good level of English or French, and 3 years or more of work experience. What if the Express Entry score is not competitive? What are some alternatives? Well, one of them could be a provincial program, which we've talked about, but it usually requires ties to the province. Another option is if they have a job offer or they're able to get a job offer, we might also be able to bring them to Canada under a work permit. And once they get Canadian work experience, which gives them extra points, apply for permanent residence through a federal program or a provincial program. And then some clients really just don't have either. They're not competitive at the federal level. They cannot navigate Express Entry successfully. They don't have a job offer, which is the case of a lot of clients who are outside of the country, but they're willing to maybe do a program of study in Canada, a post-secondary degree, a master's, a college degree. And by coming to Canada as students, and after graduating, getting a post-graduation work permit that allows them to work in Canada, they might be able to become permanent residents eventually, because after being here, they'll be able to find options through provincial programs to immigrate, or just the fact that they've received Canadian education, they've received Canadian work experience, allows them to be more competitive under Express Entry. So that's a route that some of our clients follow as well. They come to study, they later go to work permit, and eventually they become permanent residents. That's how I did it myself. I mean, I was born and raised in Colombia, South America. I came to study my university degree, my master's, and then my law degree in Canada. And eventually I applied for permanent residence, having been an international student first. Now let's talk about a very different set of clients, business people. Very different factors, right? So Canada, why is Canada so focused on young people, highly educated, good level of English or French when we're talking about skilled workers? One reason. Those are factors that are going to make them more successful integrating to the labor market, and they want to have them in the labor market for the longest time possible, right? So if you're 50, you're not going to be in the labor market as much as if you're 25. So that's why they give points according to your age. For business people, it's very different, right? I mean, business people, good entrepreneurs, highly agile. I mean, people who are very good at establishing businesses. And I know that Phil Cohen is going to be talking a lot more about this subject after. So I'll just kind of like provide an overview. They have other factors, or Canada's interested in other things. They're interested in how much money they have. and how much they can invest in Canada. They're interested in their experience as business owners in many cases, or senior executives. And the age and language might not matter so much, because those, I mean, most people who are successful business owners or entrepreneurs, they're in their 40s, they're in their 50s. They're not necessarily in their 20s or 30s, right? So there's a lot of options too. That's kind of like the general topic. Like there's many different programs and many things. There's programs at the provincial level to apply for permanent residence as an entrepreneur, as a business person. Quebec, and I might just be jumping a little bit back and forth just so you see. So Quebec is the only one that has an investor program. The only one that still has a program where you just put money down and you get permanent residence. And basically you need to have certain net worth and invest up to 1.2 million. That needs to be the investment, but some of it can be financed through a financial institution. So you can put some of that and then borrow the rest. It's the only province that still has an investor program. And the main reason why this is the case is because Canada at the federal level and the provinces have realized that a lot of investors, they were navigating the investor programs and they were coming to Canada, but they really wouldn't, they would keep their money abroad. They would just get their citizenship and leave. So it wasn't so much of a benefit to Canada as entrepreneur programs where people are forced to start a business, hire people, buy capital, rent places. So those seem to be much better for the Canadian economy, and that's why they've kind of moved towards those models. I think Phil might be talking about this later. I don't want to go case by case, but I've provided you in the slides. If you were to do a provincial program for business people, what's the minimum net worth and what's the minimum investment that people need to have? And that's an important part, that all of these have minimum numbers in terms of net worth and investment. Larger provinces tend to have higher numbers than smaller provinces, but it's not for everyone. I mean, we're talking about normally an investment of at least $200,000, $300,000, and because of what I'm going to be talking about in a second, just having the minimum might not be enough, because most provinces, the way that they work is that you might need to compete with other people who are interested in navigating the programs to be able to get an invitation to apply. So basically, if you just meet the minimum requirements, that might not be enough. There's different ways to accessing these programs. So Quebec would be one of those where you still just apply, and if you're accepted, you get permanent residence eventually. There's others where you apply, you get a work permit, and then permanent residence. There's some where there's an expression of interest, then you apply and you get permanent residence. And I'll be talking a little bit about this process. And then most of them are gravitating towards the fourth one that I have here, where you have to go through 4 steps. So the first step is creating a profile online, where based on education, language skills, your business concept, how much you're going to invest, how many people you're going to hire, your net worth, whether you visited Canada in the past or the province in the past, a few factors, you're given a score. Only those more competitive are invited to apply. If you submit an application and you're successful, the province says, okay, here's a work permit. Not your permanent residence, here's a work permit. You have 2 years to set up the business or buy the business that you said you were going to buy or set up. And if in those 2 years you prove to us that you've done that, and you submit a final report basically documenting your efforts, then we give you a nomination certificate with which you can apply for permanent residence. So it's not a guarantee. I'll be honest, I don't particularly like these programs that much, and I don't tend to navigate them very much with clients. Sometimes it might be the only option because it's risky. I mean, what if you are successful, you get invited, you come and you set up stuff, and then you don't meet the requirements from the province? You're going to be in a problem. You're going to be in a jam at that point, because they might not give you the nomination. So it's long, bureaucratic, and expensive for the client. They had to make a big investment. So I'll talk a little bit about the alternatives that I like to navigate with my clients rather than the provincial programs. There's one which I confess I haven't done a lot of applications here. And the main reason is because it has big bureaucratic hurdle. So it's one of those that has a sexy title, sexy name, and a lot of people hear about, which is a startup visa. And I remember when it came out, people thought, oh, this is going to be a great opportunity. But it is very bureaucratic and a little bit challenging to navigate. mainly because the main requirement to navigate it is that you need to have a letter of support from one of 3 organizations. So either a venture, and they're all listed. So it's not just any of them. It has to be those that have been pre-approved by the government of Canada. So it either has to be a letter of support from a venture capitalist from which you have raised $200,000 in investment. So that's a challenge. You need to make a pitch. They need to be willing to invest that. An angel investor from which you have raised $75,000 in investment, or a business incubator. So there's certain business incubating organizations in Canada that provide these letters of support. So you need to have that to begin with. And someone a bit like a business planner like Phil Cohen, who has a session later on, or I think he might be having it right now, they might help you prepare that pitch. But if you don't have that letter of support, you can't get started. So that's why I find we don't end up navigating this program as much. You need to have certain language requirements and sufficient funds, but those normally don't tend to be an issue. And at the time that you become a permanent resident, the business will have to be incorporated in Canada, and then the people who are getting the permanent resident needs to be in active management there. So it is an option, but you need to make that pitch first to an organization that will give you the green light to apply. There's some self-employed programs which don't require any investment at all. It's mainly proving that you have certain experience, and with that experience, immigrating to Canada to start your life here, likely in that trade. But they're very limited. It used to be to only 3 things: farming, cultural activities, and athletics, so athletes. Now the farming is suspended, so it's only cultural activities and athletes. So it might be a path for people who are self-employed. It's very hard for them to navigate some of the other traditional paths. Some of the people in cultural activities don't have that much money to start a business in Canada. Athletes, again, they might be excluded from other programs. So when we have to, we navigate these programs, but very, very specific. And then in the last slide, I have kind of like my preference when it comes to business people to immigrating to Canada. At first, it's a work permit option, but it's a work permit option that gives us the possibility to eventually do permanent residence. So one of them, which I really like and I use quite often, is called an intracompany transfer. And I do this with people who have a foreign business and they want to expand that business to Canada. So they might have a manufacturing facility in Bangladesh, and they want to open a subsidiary in Canada or an affiliate in Canada, same owners or owned by the company in Bangladesh, to promote, to sell their products to North America. So they open that subsidiary and they bring themselves, one of the owners or one executive in the firm, basically it could be someone in a senior managerial or a managerial position, to run that Canadian company. So it's one way for someone who has a business to open a subsidiary in Canada, no minimum investment amount that they're looking for. It just has to make sense within the company. And basically, if they're an employee for that company, they can come to Canada as an employee for that company, even if they're the owner. And there's a way for them to get a work permit, which eventually after 1 year gives them the opportunity to transition to permanent residence. There's people who are investors. So we have free trade agreements with some countries where they don't have to have a company already, but they can do a substantial investment in Canada, which normally has to be more than 100,000. Again, a way for them to get them a work permit and eventually transition to permanent residence. And then for those who are not from a free trade agreement country, for those who don't already own a business that are setting up a subsidiary in Canada, there might be options too if they buy at least 50% plus one of a business that already exists in Canada. And then that business can apply to bring them as their owner and operator. And with that, we can get them a work permit and at the same time, get them extra points to apply for permanent residence. So as I see, it's 10:29. I want to make sure that I end on time. Here's my information, my email, and my phone number. We have offices in Toronto. We have offices in Bogota, Colombia as well. And I hope that I've been able to summarize a little bit of the options out there. Thanks for being here. Thanks for participating. And if you want to explore your options to come to Canada, be happy to do so.